Okay, so here we are at Prime Minister's Questions on the 18th of October 2017. Let's see what old Jeremy Corbyn's got for us today then.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I joined the Prime Minister in recognising Anti-Slavery Day and recognising that the slave trade was one of the most grotesque times in the history of this planet, and we must all be resolved to drive out slavery in any form whatsoever.
I like the way Theresa May is pretending to be against slavery whilst promoting like wage slavery through her policies. Oh, slavery's bad, but actually, let's enslave the population in shitty jobs and with debt and so on and so forth. Oh dear. How they can pretend to be opposed to slavery whilst essentially being slave masters is kind of shocking when you think about it.
I hope the Prime Minister will join me in expressing sympathy, solidarity and support for the people of Somalia following the horrific terrorist atrocity in Mogadishu last weekend. Mr. Speaker, I welcome today's fall in unemployment. But, Mr. Speaker, the same figures show that real wages are lower today than they were 10 years ago. Most people in work are worse off. Does the Prime Minister really believe falling wages are a sign of a strong economy?
The answer is, of course, yes. The Tories have designed the economy to drive people into any form of work, going for any amount of money. So the fact that wages have fallen and 0 hours contracts and all this bollocks, the Uber economy, whatever the fuck you want to call it, is just straight up exploitation. That's a success. That's not what the Tories consider to be a failing economy. That's a good economy. That's exactly what you want if you're the Tories who own everything in this country, who are the rentiers. This is so. I mean, he's right to put it on the record because he's asking the question: do they consider this a success? Theresa May, of course, won't answer in simple terms, but it's really shocking that wages are now below where they were before the financial crash, and I don't think that people really understand how bad that actually is. Like, that is excruciating for the population. It's shocking that it's happened, and yet, it's just sort of become part of normality. Anyway.
Prime Minister.
First of all, can I join the Right Honourable Gentleman in expressing our concern at the terrible terrorist attack that took place in Mogadishu. As we know, it killed nearly 300 people and many hundreds were injured. And terrorism in Somalia undermines the stability of the Horn of Africa, and we will continue to work with the international community to try and bring stability to Somalia and to that part of Africa. And of course, part of that is dealing with the terrorist threat that they face.
It's good that they're talking about the terrorist attack, but it's also worth noting that we've killed hundreds of civilians in Syria and other Middle Eastern countries through our airstrikes and military intervention, as they call it. So from Air Wars, a website which monitors the death toll in the Middle Eastern wars, they say that Air Wars monitoring indicates that at least 433 civilians likely died as a result of coalition actions at Raqqa during August, more than double the number of estimated fatalities the previous month. Among those credibly reported by local monitors as killed in August at Raqqa were at least 74 children and 62 women, both estimates up considerably from the previous month. To date, more than 180 children have been killed in coalition air and artillery strikes since June 6th, according to Air Wars assessment. So, now we're part of that coalition. It's US led, but we're still part of it. So it's all well and good to talk about what some terrorism in Somalia, which yes, it's horrendous. But look at what we're doing. I mean, 433 civilians by the count of air wars. There's probably a lot more than that, by the way, and that's just in 1 month. So 300 in Somalia, terrorism, awful. But look at what we're doing. Look at, as Chomsky says, there's one easy way to decrease the amount of terrorism in the world: stop participating in it.
The Right Honourable Gentleman, I think, may actually have done a first in the House of Commons today. Because I think it is the first time, certainly since I became Prime Minister, that he's actually welcomed a fall in unemployment.
I don't actually know how anybody can take these unemployment figures seriously. When you look at what's considered employment, you could be working an hour a week on a fucking 0 hours, God knows what, cleaning a toilet, be classed as self-employed, and therefore you're employed. It's a fiction, and that's why it doesn't add up. You have record levels of employment and record low levels for wages. I mean, this is exactly what happens when people are just taking any old fucking what's called a job and essentially forced into it. So I don't really understand why they keep bragging about these fictitious figures. Anyway.
It is good news that more people are in work. It is good news that the unemployment rate is at its lowest level for over 40 years. That does mean more money being taken in wages by people to their families. And he asks about the cost of living, and I'll tell him what we've done in relation to the cost of living. 30 million people have been given a tax cut that's worth £1,000 to a basic rate taxpayer every year. We have given the low paid, through the national living wage, the highest pay increase for 20 years. And for those who take the full entitlement, doubling free childcare is worth £5,000 per child per year to every family. That's what we're doing to help people with the cost of living.
People are not stupid. I mean, if they can work it out. This isn't a good deal for me. Most of the polls that are taken on this show that around 55%, 50% heading towards the majority are happy to pay higher taxes to get better services. So it's an odd thing that when they brag about this. When she's bragging as well about the fucking we took children out of children and we're paying for nurseries and all this stupid shit, and it's like that's all well and good, but you're also forcing people into work. So what if they actually want to spend time with their fucking children and don't want to send them off to one of these horrible private nurseries? I thought Conservatives were all about the family unit. Well, it's funny that, isn't it? They don't seem to give a fuck in this case, do they? It's just, there you go, get in a fucking private nursery. And let me guess, they're making money out of it as well, of course. Anyway.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the Prime Minister could do a first and answer a question.
Oh, you gotta love Corbyn's sick burns. Every week he's got another one. Bam! The answer is no, of course she can't.
The question I asked her was about falling wages. And this week, Mr. Speaker, Christine, a worker in a village shop, wrote to me saying this: I am worse off. I cannot afford to keep my car, which I struggle to buy, on the road. I need my car to attend appointments, job hunt for a better position, and take my son to activities. We don't have a luxurious lifestyle, and we don't want one. We just want to feel secure. Mr. Speaker, when millions of workers are having to rely on the benefit system just to make ends meet, isn't that a sign not of a strong economy, but of a weak economy.
Corbyn makes a good point there, but this is the thing. I mean, the Tories are all about the free market and the joys of the free market, and then they heavily subsidise and fund the free market. So, no, of course, people shouldn't be relying on welfare, and it should be earning enough to support themselves. But this insecurity that this woman is talking about here, this is exactly what they want. This is exactly what the structure, the neoliberal structure wants. When you drive people into insecurity, they will do anything for any amount of money anywhere, and they don't even consider that they should have rights at work and stuff, which is precisely what you want if you own some big, massive fucking corporation. So it depends on your perspective. From the Tories' perspective, it's a triumph. That's exactly what they wanted to create, and that's exactly what they've created. But you can't claim this is the free market. This is heavily subsidised state capitalism. I'm sick of hearing them talk about the joys of the free market and then say, well, we're helping make work pay. Well, work should pay. Why does the state have to fund private industry to make work pay? Why is that happening? You have to think about that. That's completely oxymoronic.
Minister.
I recognise that, like Christine, there are people in this country who are finding life difficult.
I don't think finding life difficult is the right way to describe it. And, recognising something is very different from doing something about it. Which they won't ever do because, again, it works in their benefit. This is why they've created this system.
I have recognised that since I came into this role. But that is why it is so important that government takes steps to help people with the cost of living, with the costs that they find themselves facing week in and week out. It's why the measures that I've just listed to the right honourable gentleman in tax cuts and national living wage are important. It's why it's important, for example, we've frozen fuel duty. We've ensured that we've taken some people who are the lowest paid out of paying income tax altogether.
That's actually not true. If you look at it proportionally, poor people pay a lot more tax in VAT. As for fuel duty being frozen, probably, but again, proportionally from what I've seen, poor people actually pay a lot more tax.
We are going to introduce an energy price cap. This is all about helping...
God, the bollocks of this woman. When Miliband wanted to introduce an energy cap, they fucking said, oh God, it'll be the end of the economy, the free market, all the rest of it. What about choice? And now look, she's the one advocating for an energy cap, which, by the way, I don't trust her to do anyway. But still, the goddamn balls of this woman.
It's all about helping people with the cost of living.
Quick bit of advice. When the Tories say they're going to help you, fucking run. Get the fuck out of there. This is what the Tories consider to be helping people. It's the same with the disability benefit. We're helping people into work by what? Sending them to the grave early? Taking away their money? Sending them for pointless assessments. They're incredibly cruel. Cutting the amount of money they get on benefits. Whenever a Tory says they're going to help you, just fucking get the fuck out of there. It's that... so silly.
But you can only do that if you have a strong economy, and you only get a strong economy with a Conservative government.
I don't actually know how she can say that with a straight face. Oh god, a strong economy, and it's just like, oh god, it's not a strong economy though, because everyone's broke and wages are for record lows and they're below where they were before the fucking financial crash. And when you say strong economy, you're talking about what exactly? What does it even mean? GDP is a measure of nothing unless the wealth is distributed equally. So what is she even talking about here? It's just, it just drives you insane. They don't even have a strong economy, and she was just pretending that she does, pretending.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Mr. Speaker, people struggling to make ends meet, private sector rental evictions up, wages down, universal credit in a shambles. Is Christine wrong, or is she just an example of what it's like living in modern Britain? Mr. Speaker, last week I asked the Prime Minister to scrap the unfair charges on the Universal Credit Helpline. Yeah. Today, she's finally bowed to that pressure.
Yeah, well done. I didn't actually know that they'd scrapped those charges, but that's nothing. That's not anything new. They've been charging fuckloads to call up the DWP for ages. It's good if they have scrapped it, but that's been going on for like 4, 5, 6 years. So, good that they've got rid of it. But geez, I don't know why it's suddenly come on the agenda now.
But the fundamental problems of universal credit remain. Yeah. The 6-week wait, rising indebtedness, rent arrears and evictions. Will the Prime Minister now pause universal credit and fix the problems before pressing ahead with the rollout?
I actually disagree with the universal credit system entirely. First of all, it's rolling a lot of benefits into one. It's trying to get rid of the idea that anybody's unemployed or anybody's disabled. Universal credit means nothing. I wrote an article about it. I'm not going to go into it now, but for anybody who's interested in this, I wrote about the effect that the semantics that they're using around universal credit, as well as the system itself, is essentially an attempt to write out the reasons why people are claiming benefits, and thus we think about how benefits are claimed and why they're claimed in a different way to how we traditionally do. But the whole thing, in my opinion, is completely stupid and pointless. They've already pissed away like 13 billion on this fucking universal credit bollocks, doing something which really didn't need to be done in the first place.
Prime Minister!
Yes, it is absolutely right. But listen to the sentence.
Send to the honourable member for Brent Central before she's an aspiring stateswoman and must conduct herself with due decorum. Come. Again, maybe the honourable lady is another member who should take up yoga.
Well, what random comment? Must be some sort of inside joke. Oh god, the thought of any of these like butt ugly motherfuckers like doing yoga is just enough to make your stomach churn. Sorry, I don't want to be horrible to the woman, or but just in general, there are some people you don't want to think about performing yoga. MPs spring to mind in that category.
The Prime Minister.
I suggest to honourable members opposite that they listen to the whole sentence that I was...
I think she means listen to the whole lie that I was about to make.
going to make. Yes, it is absolutely right that we have announced this morning that we are going to change in relation to the telephone charge that is made on people here. I said last week that we were listening.
The Tories are listening to them. I'm not going to do anything much about it, but they'll listen to it. Well, that's good.
To a number of proposals that have been made. We have done that. And it's also, I think it's right to have done this now because there's a lot of emphasis, a lot of publicity
on
around
Twitter, Charlotte Hughes, who writes for the Morning Star, she made the point that it's funny how the Universal Credit Hotline or benefit hotlines in general, they cost so much money. But when it comes to benefit fraud, they're completely free. And I said to her, you know, I tweeted out that I'd actually called up the benefit fraud hotline and said to them that A4E are committing benefit fraud because, they're stealing millions of taxpayers' money. A4E, by the way, is a work program provider who's been in trouble for fraud before and, in my opinion, are an incredibly fraudulent company. They've now changed their name to... I think it's People Plus or something, but it's the same old shit. All these government contracts are all linked to dodgy bastards who are usually committing some form of fraud.
I want people to know that they can ring in, that they can get their advice, and that they can do that without being worried about it. And that's exactly what we're going to do. But the Right Honourable Gentleman talks about universal credit and talks about pausing universal credit. Why have we introduced universal credit? It's a simpler system. It's a system that encourages people to get into the workplace. It is a system that is working because more people are getting into work. And pausing universal credit won't help those people who will be helped by going to universal credit, getting into the workplace and bringing home more pay for their families.
You know what does encourage people to get into the workplace? Decent, well-paid jobs and education and opportunities. I don't know why the government... See, again, like she's stepping in here and saying, well, the government has to reform welfare to make sure that people get into work. Why? If the free market is working so well, the government shouldn't have to do anything, should it? So it doesn't make any sense. Am I the only one who picks up on this?
Jeremy Corbyn!
Mr. Speaker, there is a very long list of people urging the Prime Minister to pause universal credit, including the Citizens Advice Bureau, the Trussell Trust, John Major, and, I understand, 24 of our own backbenchers. Well, they've got a chance this afternoon. They can vote to pause universal credit.
From what I've read, the Tories are likely to abstain on that vote, so I don't know how that's going to go. Still, it's embarrassing though, isn't it? Because there are actually a lot of Tories against this rollout and they want to halt it. God, what it must be like to be Theresa May in charge of this. Literally, it's a coalition of chaos. It's kind of satisfying.
And show that they are representing their constituents. The public sector pay cap, Mr. Speaker, is causing real suffering and real staff shortages. Last week, the Health Secretary announced the NHS pay cap was scrapped. But when asked if the NHS is going to get extra money to fund any agreed pay rise, he replied, "That is something I can't answer right now." Well, this is right now. The Prime Minister is here right now. How about an answer right now?
Well, we all know we won't get an answer right now because she can't answer a single fucking question. But it shows you how bad things have gotten, where this has now become a massive issue, just like basic pay rises. You know, I mean, you go back like 10, 15 years before the crash, before the Tories got in, then it was just considered like standard to get a pay rise. Like now it's considered something, sort of some dangerous left-wing, hard left, whatever they call it, ideology. It shows you like how bad things have gotten. It shouldn't even be an issue. Inflation happens. Pay rises should happen. And now you have to fight for it. It's absolutely absurd.
Prime Minister!
as I have explained to the Right Honourable Gentleman and the House in the past, the way in which we approach the whole question of public sector pay is through the work of the pay review bodies. They have all reported for this current year. They did that against the remit that was set by government of a blanket cap of 1% in relation to public sector pay. For the 2018-19 year, we have changed that remit. What we have done is to ensure that there is flexibility in the system for that period. But perhaps I could just explain something else to the Right Honourable Gentleman, because I fear that for all his years in Parliament, there is one thing that he has failed to recognise. Government has no money of its own.
Right, gotta stop her there. That's just absolutely absurd what she's saying. The government can sell bonds to essentially fund things. And they can raise taxes. The government has no money of its own. What? Oh, God. It's just painful. It's painful. I don't know. If anyone's an economist and watching this, tell me if I'm fucking this up. But as I understand it, the government is the one entity that can create money out of nothing.
Government gets money.
Oh dear, Mr. McNeill, you're becoming overexcitable again, young man. Calm yourself. No need for excessive gesticulation. It serves no useful purpose whatsoever.
I wonder what he was doing. Was he doing a wanker sign? Oh, God. Could this be any further from, what most people think of as normality?
Let's hear the Prime Minister's reply. Prime Minister will be
heard. It'll take a while.
Prime Minister.
Government has no money of its own. It collects money in taxes.
Yes, and you can raise the amount. You can increase the amount of tax you collect. And you can create money through bonds. It can be done.
From businesses and people to spend on the NHS and on the services that people need. If businesses aren't being set up, if businesses aren't growing, if people aren't in work, government doesn't have the money to spend on NHS pay, on schools and hospitals. And, of course, the only way you ensure those businesses are growing, the only way you ensure that people are in jobs, that government has the money to spend on schools and hospitals and NHS pay, is with a Conservative government.
Well, there's no evidence for that at all, is there? I mean, it's the opposite. What businesses is she talking about? Anyway, do we now have lots of small, medium business enterprises thriving? I don't think so. Look around you. All you see is fucking Tesco's and Sainsbury's and Uber and all this bullshit. And not only that, I mean, the government heavily funds the private sector. One, through the welfare system. So, through universal credit, topping up low wages. But also in many other ways, through subsidies, and through handouts, through tax breaks. I don't honestly, it's just grounded in a fantasy world. I don't know if there's any economists listening to this, perhaps they can correct me, but this is how I see it, and this, from what I've read, and from the economists that I've listened to, this is what they're saying. Anyway.
The Prime Minister seemed to have no problem finding £1 billion in a couple of days for the DUP. She needs to make it clear. She needs to make it clear, Mr. Speaker, to the NHS workers what pay rise is being offered, when they will receive it, and what funding is being provided, and what cuts she's proposing to make elsewhere in order to deal with that. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, young people are in record levels of debt. This week, the Financial Conduct Authority warned, and I quote, of a pronounced build-up of indebtedness amongst a younger age group to fund essential living costs. Isn't this yet another sign not of a strong economy, but of a weak economy.
Yeah, that's completely true. But I mean, there's been multiple reports on this. One of the first articles I wrote for Evolve Politics was millennials are the poorest generation since World War II, and poorer actually have half as much wealth as people born just 10 years earlier did when they were the same age. And part of this is going to push people into debt as well. So there's nothing controversial about this. This is how the system is designed. Again, it's going to laden you with debt. Remember also, debt is a way of controlling people. So there's not an accident. It's nothing like this. Is it a sign of a healthy economy? Not at all. But it is good if you're creditor, isn't it? So again, this is how the economy under the Tories is designed. It's designed around debt. It's designed to drive people into debt. It's designed to drive them into insecure work. For young people, for like my generation, we really feel fucked at the moment because of all this. And you know, it doesn't really give you a lot of choice. Debt is really not a choice. It's something that I think a lot of people are doing just because they have to. You don't really want to be in £50,000 of debt for getting an education, and then people are coming out from spending all this money on education, and what are they getting for it? Insecure work that's badly paid. If you can find it, unpaid internships, no real career prospects for the future. This is how the economy has been designed, and it's not an accident. This is what the Tories are doing, and you see the results of it.
Prime Minister.
This is, I have to say to the right honourable gentleman, we have heard from the OECD that the deficit that the Labour government left us was unsustainable.
I don't really like all this talk about the deficit because I don't think it's that meaningful, to be honest. I mean, you ask people which country doesn't have a deficit, and they usually can't show you anything. I mean, North Korea doesn't have a deficit. Does that mean they have an amazingly strong economy? I think that it's really very misleading, all of this. And apart from that, the Tories have always... the deficit has risen. It's been under the Tories. It goes down a little bit, and then it will go massively up. So this idea of deficit reduction is some sort of Tory success story. It's actually the complete opposite if you look at the figures. Yet time and time again, they'll wheel this out. So you have the deficit which isn't even meaningful in the first place, followed by Theresa May's lies about the deficit, which are then echoed throughout the entire right wing. It's just absurd. I was absolutely sick of it. Who lays awake at night thinking, oh my God, I'm so worried about the deficit? You know, that's not what people care about, and it's not a particularly big issue. So I don't know why she keeps going on about this, other than it's a thing that makes it sound like the Tories understand economics, but they've still fucked it up. So what is the point in this? What is going on? The OECD says a lot of things. Just because they said the deficit was huge, which it was at the time, doesn't mean that you have to do austerity. Those things are not mutually, they don't cut, one that doesn't necessarily follow.
Since then, we have indeed found money for the people of Northern Ireland. We've also found, as I was explaining earlier, £20 billion to give a tax cut to 30 million people, and £38 billion to freeze fuel duty.
And that then becomes money that's lost.
Ordinary working people
because you're not collecting enough in tax, which doesn't get spent on public services. So the public services get cut. That's not what people are asking for. That's not what people want around them. They want schools to be funded properly. They want hospitals to be funded properly. I don't know. It's just kind of amazing that she'd even brag about this. But it's because tax you have to be seeing the world through according to the neoliberal doctrine, you have to see the world through the eyes of the rich, of rich people. And so rich people don't want to pay tax. They get very little benefit from it directly. They don't use the schools. They don't use hospitals. That's nothing to do with them. The welfare means absolutely nothing to them. So in order to make you think that this mindset applies to you, they use this, well, we're taking you out of tax, because what good is it for ordinary people to take them out of tax if you're then taking away their services and their wages are decreasing? It doesn't mean anything. But at the upper end of the spectrum, the people who don't want to pay tax, it means a lot. It's ideological. It's to get you to support, I always say it's like slaves being indoctrinated by their masters. That's the way I would look at it. The masters want you to see the world through their eyes.
And when it comes to students and young people and their fear about
it's
death...
not just fear, it's grounded in something. The fear is correct. It's not just some wild idea. The statistics are right there. It's right to be scared about it. I mean, this is the thing. So on the one hand, they're happy to make us scared about, we can't spend on this, we can't spend on that. If we're a government, it's crazy. We don't have any money. Think about what will happen in the future. People can't pay back debts. Be scared. But when it comes to personal debt, oh, well, you might be scared of it, but fuck you, who cares?
There's one thing we know, and that is we shouldn't be racking up debts today like Labour proposed that those young people would have to pay off tomorrow.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Mr. Speaker, it's very interesting that she talks about what happened 10 years ago. Her former friend, George Osborne, said earlier this week, did Gordon Brown cause the subprime crisis in America? No. He went on to say, broadly speaking, the government did what was necessary in a very difficult situation.
Unfortunately, it is true that they had to bail out the banks. Now, I think that the austerity that followed is completely unnecessary. But if you hadn't have bailed out those fucking banks, we would have been in the depression, the recession would have been far worse. And George Osborne always knew this. This is not anything new. He always knew that they had to bail them out. So they just simply had no choice. I'm sorry to say it, but, the correct thing would have been to regulate the financial sector properly afterwards and to not impose austerity on the population who didn't cause the crash in the first place. Osborne is not particularly bright, but he's smart enough to at least understand that. So it shouldn't be a revelation that he said this openly now. I think everybody in politics knows this.
Mr. Speaker, under this Prime Minister, we have a weak economy. Yes. UK growth is currently the worst amongst the 10 largest EU economies. We're the only major economy where wages are lower today than they were 10 years ago, even without the risks posed by this government's bungled Brexit negotiations. It's very interesting the Home Secretary is necessary to keep the two protagonists apart. Mr. Speaker, we now have weak growth, falling productivity, falling investment, falling wages. How does the Prime Minister have the nerve to come here and talk about a strong economy when the figures show the exact opposite?
We've been on the rampage there for the final question, but he's completely right, though. It is so cheeky. I mean, it's just it's Tory fantasy land. They're just denying reality. It's like flat earthers. Here's the evidence. Here's the proof. Well, but we done this with the recession, and behind Labour done that, and they'll overspend. But then we say that debt's bad, but actually, when it's personal debt, it's not bad at all. Well, it sort of is, but it's just it's the ramblings of madness. You look at it, just denying reality. And of course, they're fucking up Brexit big time, as Corbyn points out here, because they just don't really know what to do. So, good for Corbyn for going on the rampage there. I do like that final question when it's like, all the others are like a little jab and a hook and a cross, and then the final one is like a fucking haymaker on the chin. But let's just see how May rambles through this answer.
To the right honourable gentleman, the OECD says about the United Kingdom, we have the most efficient, accessible healthcare system, fiscal sustainability has improved, important steps have been taken to improve educational outcomes, and jobs and earnings are good.
I will be amazed if they said they're good. I don't know, they need to look in that. But again, the OECD releases a lot of reports saying a lot of different things. But the facts are, as Corbyn says, and you can go and look for yourself. And not only that, you probably know it in your own day-to-day life that what he's saying is correct.
That's what the OECD says about the strong economy under this Conservative government. The way to get a weak economy is to borrow £500 billion like the Labour Party is proposing. The way to get a weak economy is to ensure that you are promising spending after spending after spending, and people are going to have to pay for that.
Again, this is now just nonsense. So 500 billion, when they say about this, well, it's going to laden us with debt if you can't borrow this amount of money. Well, that's how investment works, isn't it? And of course, the government can reclaim it through taxes, and in economics, you have what's called the multiplier effect. So people go out, start spending it, more things need doing, etc. So there's nothing particularly wild about this. And not only that, the Tories are endlessly investing in things themselves, and they brag about this. Whether it be what they call the Northern Powerhouse, or yesterday they were saying, we're going to spend 25 million on an upgrading the country to 5G. Well, that's an investment. And they're always bragging here about the free market, but what kind of free market is this? The free market where they're paying for businesses to expand, to do what they want. That's not the free market, is it? So the whole thing is just a fantasy. It's actually kind of embarrassing that this even passes for political discourse, because it's so far from basic economics that you kind of think, how do they even get away with this?
The only way you get money to put into public services, the only way we can give people tax cuts to help them with the cost of living, is to ensure we deal with the deficit, get our debts down, and deal with Labour's Great Recession, which put us into this position in the first place.
I mean, she's just been told what caused the recession by, in Osborne's own words that are not controversial, which absolutely everybody could tell you. And she still comes out with this. Labour caused the recession, which just isn't true. It's just not. I mean, it doesn't matter how many times you say it, Teresa, it's just not true. So there we have it anyway. That was pretty interesting and lively session. Theresa May, it's almost impossible to, one, take her seriously, two, care about anything she says. But these arguments they keep using are really falling to bits at this point, and I think the public has increasingly had enough and just doesn't buy it. People really don't care that much about government debt. What they really care about is private debt, and when the bailiffs come to their own door. No government, as Adam Smith said, no government has ever repaid its debt. You'll either go bankrupt or you just keep borrowing, and for the most part it's the keep borrowing thing. The national debt itself has risen God knows how much under the Tories. Some estimates are that it's doubled. I'm inclined to agree with that from the figures I've seen. It may even be more than that. But the point is, it's not that important anyway. What's important is when the money is being invested and it's going to come back through taxes. That's what's important. Currently, they've added all this to the debt and the deficit, which have both grown. People are getting poorer, they're cutting everything in sight. taking away poor people's stuff, they're indebting everybody. This is not a successful economy for most people, but it is a successful economy for the Tories, because the Tories own everything. They are the capitalists in this country. They're the rentiers. This is how they've designed the economy. So, you know, it's I think the conversation is starting to change. I think that Corbyn put a lot of good things on the table here. He usually does a pretty good job. And yeah, so thanks for watching, and hopefully we'll, you know, just thanks for watching and listening to my ramblings. Cheers.